Hello and welcome to a little tutorial video on how you can make a very easy little crochet pot holder using the back loop double crochet stitch from the second stitch tutorial on this channel, which, if you're using American terminology, is exactly the same as the back loop single crochet stitch. For this though, you're going to need some yarn in colours of your choice with an appropriately sized hook. I am using Lion Brand cottons with a 4mm hook, all of which I will link in the description. Also, you're going to need a tape measure or ruler of some sort, some scissors and a darning needle. Okay, and so the first thing you're going to want to do is decide how big you want your pot holder to be. Now I want mine to be about 8 inches square, and so I've set up my tape measure just so that I can measure against and find out exactly when 8 inches is. I don't want to risk it being too small or too big. And the next thing we're going to be doing is starting to create our foundation chains. First of all though, we need to get our yarn attached to our hook, and so we're going to create a slip knot simply by putting a little loop in our yarn, passing the tail through, pulling it so that it's somewhat tight, and then inserting our hook into that little hoop there that's on the end. Then we can just pull that gently so that it tightens onto the shaft. And from there we can start creating our foundation chains. Remember that we need to have 8 inches worth of them. And remember that to create your chains, you're simply grabbing hold of that yarn and pulling it through the hoop that was already on the shaft of the hook. And just keep on adding more chains onto the end and occasionally comparing it to your tape measure just to see where we're getting up to. There we go, so that is about 8 inches. Bearing in mind the fact that this does not need to be exact in any way, it is entirely up to you how big your pot holder is, but roughly 8 inches will do. And we now don't need our tape measure, so we can take that one away. Okay, so now that we've got our foundation chains in place, the next thing we need to do is add our turning chain. So that is going to involve adding just one more little chain stitch onto the end, like so. And then we can start working in the opposite direction. So we're going to be skipping that little chain stitch that we just made, that doesn't count as a stitch, and we're going to be inserting our hook into the next stitch along. From there, grab hold of your yarn and pull through, and then grab hold of it again and pull through those 2 loops already on the shaft. Just like so. And again, so we're going into the next stitch along, insert our hook, grab hold of the yarn, pull through that first loop, grab hold of it again and pull through the 2 hoops which are on the shaft. And then again, we go into the very next stitch along. Ignore the big gap that is just there that you can see. That is the stitch that we've just worked into. It can be very tempting to go back into that one, but you don't need to. We're going into the next stitch. So insert the hook again, grab our yarn, pull through, grab our yarn and pull through again. And we're going to keep doing that into every single stitch now until we get to the end of the row. So we've come to the very end of the row now, and that is my final stitch that you can see just there. Ignore the little knot on the end, that is the slip knot that we created at the beginning. That one could be completely ignored now, and so what we're going to do is we're going to insert our hook into that final stitch, grab our yarn and pull through, grab our yarn, pull through again, and now because we need to go back in the opposite direction, we are going to add our turning chain to the end, so just one little chain stitch on the end like so. And then we can turn our work over so that we can work back in the opposite direction. Now you need to skip that little stitch that you created, that was the turning chain that we just did, and instead we're going to be working into this next stitch that you can see here. So you're going to insert your hook into that stitch, grab the yarn, pull it through, grab the yarn and pull it through again. Go, so we're left with just one hoop on the shaft. You can see there's my next stitch just there. We're going to go into that little stitch, grab our yarn, pull through, grab our yarn and pull through both of the hoops on the shaft. And again, we're just going to do this going right the way back down the row till we get to the other end. Remembering of course that because this is the back loop double crochet, we are always just working into that stitch that runs right across the top of the work. And when you look back on the front of your work, you should be leaving this nice little row of raised stitches that you can see just there. Those are the front loops that we didn't work into. Right, so I've now reached the end of my row, which means it is time to change colour. What I'm going to do is I'm going to insert my hook into the final stitch, like so. I'm going to pull through the yarn, leaving 2 little hoops on the shaft like so, and I'm going to bring in my new colour that I'm switching to. So this is just a slightly paler, slightly greyish brown. I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap that over my hook like so, and I'm going to pull it through those 2 hoops, just like that. From there we can take hold of the working tail, pull it a little bit tighter, and then we're just going to do 1 little turning chain, like so on the end, so that we're ready to go back in the opposite direction. We could then turn our work over, and ignoring this little turning chain that we've just created, that's that one just there, we're going to work instead into the first stitch. So we're going to insert our hook into that first stitch, grab our yarn, pull through, grab it and pull through again to create our double crochet. And then we are going to do exactly the same as before, going all the way back in the opposite direction, working into those back loops until we get to the other side. Okay, so I've just about reached the end of that row now, just coming up to the last stitch. And because I'm going to go back in the opposite direction using the same colour, I'm just going to complete this stitch by pulling through the last 2 loops and then adding a little chain stitch on the end as our turning chain for when we go back in the opposite direction. Again, flip over the work, and I'm going to skip that little chain stitch, work into the first stitch, and then I'm going to head back in the opposite direction. Exactly the same as before, always just completing these little back loop double crochets. Right, so, and I've made it to the end of that row, and I need to change colour for the last time. So I'm pulling through those 2 loops that we can pull the new colour into. I'm going to bring in my new colour. I'm going to lay it over the top of my hook, and then I'm just going to pull it through those 2 hoops. And making sure I'm working with the right tail, add my turning chain, flip my work over. Again, skipping the little turning chain here, going into the first stitch instead, and then starting the double crochets. Now, because for this project I plan on repeating the colours, so I'm going to go for the darker, the paler, and then the yellow, just going on in sequence, repeating over and over and over, it does mean I'm going to need to cut the tails off so that I can get to the same colour again. And as soon as you've started doing a little bit of a new colour, you can go back to the previous one and just cut the tail. So that's what I'm going to do with this one. I'm going to leave 3 or 4 inches on there just so that I've got enough there so I can tie them in. But I can just snip that one off, and then with it being out of the way as well, it just means the work is much freer for you to use. It's only got 1 tail holding it in place. But the intention now is to just keep on repeating what we've already done. So it's going to be 2 rows of the dark brown, followed by 2 of the paler, followed by 2 of the yellow, and then I'm going to go back to the dark brown again. And I'm going to keep doing that until this forms a square. So it will be an 8 by 8 square once I've done, and I will meet you back once I'm at that point. Right, so these are my last couple of stitches now on this square. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to finish them off. This time, because we're completing the work, what I need to do is I need to act like I'm going to add another little chain stitch on the end, like so. And instead, I'm going to cut the tail, once again leaving 3 or 4 inches ready for tying in. And then just pull it straight through just like so. Tighten it off nicely, so that's now formed a little knot on the end that you can see. And that is going to stop everything from unravelling. That's it, it is all now locked in together. Right, so there we go. You can see there is my 8 by 8 square completed. And the next thing we need to do is something about all of these ends that we've got hanging off this side. And you will find that tying ends in is one of those things that everybody seems to do in a slightly different way. But how I do it is I will look for all the places where I changed colour. So if you can see just here, I've gone from the dark to the paler brown. And where I change colour, there will be 2 threads side by side, because that's where we changed. And what I do is I put a little knot in them. So I will go through, tie a little knot, just lightly, because we're going to be going over it with an edging stitch anyway. And from this little knot, I will now weave in these ends. And that little knot is barely visible, and it just makes absolutely certain it cannot come undone. Some people just weave it in without doing the knot, but I don't know, I always just feel like a knot makes things more secure. But I will go right the way down my work to every single colour change. Here's another one that you can see here where we've gone from the grey to the yellow. And again, I'll just put a little knot in there. just like so. Not so tight that it's pulling on any of the stitches, but tight enough that it's not going to come undone. But I will now just go down my work, find everywhere where I've got two little tails together, and then just pop these little knots in. And then we just need to go through and weave all these little tails in so that they're not in a way. Now you can do this using the hook. Personally, I prefer to use the darning needle, just because I find it a little bit less fiddly, to be honest. And because we've got the little knot in already, we're not at too much worry about the threads actually coming undone, and so we can literally just tuck the threads through a few times into the work. Always make sure you're working into the same colour, so if you're tucking in a dark brown thread, tuck it into a dark brown area on the work, otherwise it'll show up and then it'll be a little bit ugly. But it can literally just be weaved through so that it is out of the way. And then what I'll often do just to finish off is find an area where I've got several threads together, like so, and I will weave the end through there. And then I will cut off the tail right up flush against those threads. That way, that little end there is tucked underneath these threads. It's not going to come loose, it's not going to be visible. But you need to go through and do that with every single one of these tails. Okay, so once you've got all of your edges sewn in and you're happy with all of the sides of your square, then it's time to start thinking about putting an edge on this thing. Now you could theoretically just use the cloth like this. It will still function perfectly well as a pot holder, but the edge just makes it look a little bit more finished. And so what we're going to do next is we're going to come to a corner that we want our hanger to be attached to, and we need to find that very last corner stitch. In this case, that one just there. Okay, so once you've found your very edge stitch, what you're going to do is you're going to insert your hook into that stitch and you're going to bring in your edging yarn, whichever one you're using for that. I'm obviously using this sort of off-white creamy colour. You're going to lay that over the hook and then pull that through that one little edge stitch, that one little corner stitch that was right on the edge of the work. And once you've got that little stitch in place, you can do one little chain stitch just to hold that stitch on, and then you're going to go back into exactly the same stitch, grab your yarn again, pull through, grab the yarn again and pull through to create your first double crochet on this little edge. Just like so. And then, because this is a corner, you're actually going to do exactly the same thing again. So you're going to go back into that same stitch, pull through a loop, grab your yarn, pull through both of those loops, and that actually turns the corner so that we're ready to go down one of these straight edges. So we've ended up with 2 double crochets in this one little edge corner stitch. Now what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to go down the sides of our work, picking up stitches as we go, remembering that for each colour you should have 2 stitches going in for the edge. Because you've done 2 rows, so you went one way and then you went back and went the other way, each one needs to have its own little edge stitch if you think of it like that. So I need to do 2 stitches in the brown, 2 stitches in the yellow, 2 stitches in the grey. So what I can do is I can insert my hook into that little gap, grab my yarn, pull through, grab my yarn and pull through again. So we've created a little double crochet stitch on the edge of this square. And that's how we're going to be creating the border for our little pot holder that we're making. We're just going to be finding the next stitch along. So that's obviously this one in this case. You're going to insert the hook, pull through your yarn, grab hold of it and pull through the 2 loops again, just creating those double crochets, and then look for where the next stitch is going to be. So in this case it is going to be just there. Grab the yarn, pull through, grab, pull through 2, and then find the next stitch along. He's just there. So you can see I've worked my little double crochets all the way along and I've now come to the end of the row and it's time to turn the corner again. Now for this particular corner, this is actually where one of the slip knots is. So this was the very first knot that we put in when we first started our piece. We can't put the hook into that, it's absolutely solid, in which case we're going to work into the little space that is just underneath it. So what we're going to do, same as before, we will insert our hook underneath that slip knot, grab our yarn, pull through, create our little single crochet, and because we're going around a corner we're going to put 2 into the same space. So we're going to go into exactly the same hole we did just a minute ago, grab our yarn, pull it through, grab our yarn, pull through the 2 hoops just to create our little single crochet, and then we are ready to go back in the opposite direction. And because in this direction these are the chains that we created at the beginning, we've actually got really easy stitches to work our way into. And just the same as before, keep working your way down the row, putting a double crochet in every single one of the stitches, Remembering as well that this is supposed to be back loop double crochet, so try to only go into the back loops, not going through both of them. Right, so once you've gone all the way around the edge of your square, like so, then eventually you will come to a corner when you need to join it back up again. So you can see here is my final corner. This is my last double crochet into the last of the brown stitches. And what I need to do is I need to connect these two white pieces together again. Now I've got a very tempting looking stitch just there that's quite loose and open. That is actually the tail stitch, so I need to be careful not to use that one. Make sure that I'm using one of the proper stitches. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to insert my hook into one of those first stitches, grab my yarn, pull it through, and then pull it through the loop that was on the other side as well. So I've got just one loop left on that shaft. From there I can now do a little chain stitch. And if I wanted to just finish my work, I could just end it, but I'm going to put a little loop on it so that I can hang it up on the wall. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to complete another 6 chain stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so with this little run of chains there on my hook, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pass my hook back through exactly the same stitch I used to start this little run of chains, pull my arm through, and then pull it through that little hoop that's on the end of the chains as well. Just like so. There we go, I've made a little tiny hoop of chains. And what I can do from there, just to finish off the work, is I'm just going to do one more chain stitch, just to tie all those loops together, and then we are going to cut the tail. Once the tail is cut, it can just be pulled right the way through, and then give it a good tug and lock it down so that it creates a knot. And there you go. You can now see I've got a little loop on the end of my corner, just so that I could hang this up on the wall. There we go, and once we've weaved in these last 2 little tails, that will be it. Our little pot holder will be complete. And there you have it. One nice little pot holder, all complete, of a dense enough material that you can easily use it single for grabbing hold of hot lids, or you can double it over and use it for taking things out of the oven. And best of all completed using just the lovely back loop double crochet stitch. Anywho, I hope you've enjoyed this little project. Happy crocheting everybody, and I will see you again soon.